everybody, Brian Matthew from Verico the Mortgage Professionals in Kingston, Ontario, and welcome to another edition of Mortgage Straight Talk. In today's video, I'm going to talk about comparing a 5-year term mortgage to a 10-year term mortgage, and why is that important? Well, if you look over the last 10 to 20 years, 10-year rates have looked very attractive when you take a look at where the 5-year rate is and what the difference in that rate spread is. And people come into me and sit down and say, Brian, I'd like to take a look at a 10-year mortgage versus a 5. And I'm going to ask those people, why has this been? What is your interest in the 10-year? And the first thing that comes up is stability. Well, one of the things that I've promised you in this video series, an inside look at the industry and an inside look at tips and strategies that can help you make the best decision for you. And that's what we're going to do today when we examine 5-year versus 10-year. So first thing we're going to talk about is term. So term, when I talk 5-year or 10-year, that's the length of time over which your interest rate is fixed. And that's totally different from amortization, and there's going to be some amortization I'm going to talk about it in today's examples. And I'm not going to talk too much about it because in my next video I'm going to tell you the truth about amortization. So again, why would you pick 10-year? Stability. So when I have a client in my office, if they come in and they're talking about 10-year, perhaps they're thinking about it. But two things about 10-year. One is, actually the biggest thing, if you go into 10-year, a bank is going to make more money on you because you're locked in, you're fixed, you can't go anywhere because you are locked into that 10-year, and you may have a huge penalty to get out of it. And the other thing is, if a mortgage broker is recommending a 10-year to you, a mortgage broker makes more money by selling a 10-year. So you have to look at why. And I've talked about in my other videos the strategy. Why are you recommending 10-year to me? So in my case, I do something totally different when I talk to my clients. So when I'm comparing 5 to 10, my rule of thumb, if you have a 5-year mortgage at 4% and another renewal at 6%, you're going to average out at about 5%. So I like to try and take a look at current rates, what the 10-year rate is, what the 5-year rate is, look at the spread difference. And my rule of thumb, if you look at 3.39 today and 4.49 for a 10-year, the rate spread difference is 1.1%. So in the first 5 years of that mortgage, you're going to be paying 1.1% higher. So where does that rate have to be in 5 years when you compare payments, when you compare amortization and prepayment, to equal where you would be if you took a 10-year fixed for 10 years? And my example today, the renewal rate would have to be around 5.69 for that to happen. So let's take a look. I took a $250,000 mortgage at 4.49%, 10-year term, accelerated bi-weekly, 30-year amortization. Payment works out to $630 bi-weekly, and the balance is $183,868, and the remaining amortization at the end of 10 years is 15 years, 7 months. So you started with 30, you're 10 years into it, you have 15 years, 7 months. Then I said, okay, let's take a look at somebody taking a 5-year and renewing it in 5 years, and assuming that the rate now has gone up, and that rate is now up to 5.69%. So that same $250 for 3.39, 5 years, accelerated bi-weekly, 30-year amortization, payments $552 bi-weekly, it's lower than $630. Balance is $217,662, and there's 21 years, 3 months left on the amortization after the 5 years. Now that same mortgage renewing at $217,662, 5 years accelerated bi-weekly, and the amortization I'm using is 23.4 years. The payment works out to $698, and the reason I did that was to make the balances fairly close to each other. So you've got $183,406, and you have 15 years remaining. So the 10-year, 15 years, 7 months, the combination of the 5 with the interest rate increasing to 5.69%, payments go $552 to $698, and the balances are both pretty well about equal. And again, I'll explain this amortization difference in my next video. So, how do you accomplish payment stability and mitigate future risk? Because that's what you're looking at doing when you go into a 10-year. So let's take a look at these examples and change them around a bit. So the same 250, 3.39, 5 years, accelerated bi-weekly. And I'm using 24.5 years, and I'll explain this in a second. I'm making the payment $625, which is very close to the $630 we started with in the 10-year up here, to put some stability in the payment. The balance at the end of 5 years is $207,352, which is $10,300 less in 5 years, and your remaining amortization is 16 years, 9 months. Now what I did actually in this example, I'm telling people I want you to start off with a 30-year. And the reason I want you to start with a 30-year, if there's something that happens, a family incident or something where you need to reduce your payment, if you contract a shortened amortization at the front end of your mortgage and you want to go backwards, you can't do it without completely redoing your mortgage. But if you start off with a 30-year amortization and you accelerate it by prepaying it, you can always go back to the effective remaining amortization. So what I did here, I started the client off with $552, 30-year amortization, and I used his prepayment privilege after closing to increase his payment. And mortgages give you prepayment privilege of one for lump sums, the other one to increase your payments, and depending on the lender, that can be 10%, 15%, 20%, or higher than your existing payment. So what I did is after closing, I actually used that prepayment privilege to bring their payment right up to where they would have been, close to where they would have been on the 10-year. Now that balance then at $207,352 at 5.69, 5 years, accelerated bi-weekly, and I'm using 25 years as the amortization, and again I'll explain it in my amortization video, but basically the effective remaining amortization, even though there's only 16 years, 9 months left, is 25 years. So I put the payment at $644, and at the end of that 5 years, your balance is $177,909, you're $5,497 less, and you're 16 years, 3 months remaining on your mortgage. Now you may look at this and say, seems like I got more longer in my mortgage here than I had up here. And again, you're going to have to watch my amortization video that tells you how these, I'll explain what this is all about, because there's a myth about amortization. So what you've done in this example, you've accomplished your payment stability that you wanted at the front end, you've paid more, but what if your renewal rate in 5 years is less than 5.69%? If it is, you're way ahead of the game because you've actually paid so much more down in your principal during the 10-year compared to where you would have been in that 10-year scenario. In the 10 years taking a 5 and 5, you're actually way ahead. And if that renewal rate isn't 5.69, you're even further ahead. Now if the rate's higher, you're also even better prepared because you're not going to have this payment shock that you're looking at over at the next 5 years, because we've sort of equalized your payments out over that 10 years. So that's it on Mortgage Straight Talk, 5-year versus 10-year. Again, tune in for my next video on the truth about amortization. We'll explain why these things look a little different, because again, there are some truths behind amortization and what amortization is really all about. That's it for Mortgage Straight Talk. I'm Brian Matthew from the Mortgage Professionals. Thanks for watching.